Dr. Rima, you are live.
Welcome to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. You are listening to the drumbeat of freedom and the heartbeat of truth. I'm Rima Ilebo, MD. I am the medical director of the Natural Solutions Foundation, the world's largest health freedom organization. With me, as always, my co-trustee and co-host, Ralph Fusatola, JD, counsel and trustee to the Natural Solutions Foundation. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, Dr. Rima. Hello, Leon. Great to have you here today. Dr. Rima, I am so excited about this program and about what we're about to learn and what we're about to do here on May Day 2014. In early spring here in North America, in early autumn in Chile, and in Australia, I guess early autumn as well. So welcome.
Is Leon Pittard, who is the host and creator and genius of Fair Dinkum Radio in Australia, which is why we're talking about Australia, of course. And we'll be talking on this edition of the Dr. Rima Reports about something that is so mind-bogglingly horrible that you have to fasten your intellectual seatbelts. The globalists are fully at it again. They are fully engaged in a new level of toxic craziness that will truly take your breath away. And Leon is quite knowledgeable in this topic. In fact, it's the trial balloon for this particularly horrifying attempt at cataclysmic tyranny, and you'll see in a minute that those are not at all exaggerated phrases, comes straight out of Australia. Australia, as we say frequently, seems to be the belly of the beast for globalization. The trial balloons are raised there. The new ideas are flown there to see what happens. In 2006, I believe it was, Australia had before its parliament a draft legislation which received 2 readings and happily did not pass, which would have criminalized the use, preparation, or sharing of any food which at any time in human history, anywhere, had any history of use for health purposes, like, for instance, a glass of water. Here, take this glass of water. It may cure your hiccups. Or garlic. Here, take this garlic. It's supposed to be pretty good for your immune system, and it may help you with your cold. Well, that bill was defeated, and you helped to do that because your international pressure through our action item put a lot of pressure on the Parliament. Lots of other people got upset and excited about it. The bill did not pass. But then, just a few years later, a couple of things happened. One was that Thailand passed that bill and outlawed the 13 characteristic spices of Thai cuisine because they are all medicinal. Ginger, lemongrass, lang lang, garlic, etc. These are medicinal in their basic function, and they happen to taste really good and make a good cuisine. And then the United States in 2008, 2009, Ralph, which was it?
It was 2009. It was 2009.
Yeah. Sneaked those same terms into its draft regulations for CAM, complementary and alternative products, a category that they made up essentially. And had we not caught it at the last minute, it would have gone through and been part of the U.S. So things happen first in Australia. If they can get away with it, they move faster around the globe. If not, well, they reformat and go back. So, Leon, without further ado, Leon Pittard, host of Fair Dinkum Radio, a very important source of truth and anti-globalist reality. Tell us what's going on with this mental health draft bill the Mental Health Bill of 2013, now before the Parliament.
Well, good morning, Dr. Reamer and Ralph. Good to be with you.
Isn't that interesting, Dr. Rima? Are you still with us? We just lost. I'm going to suggest that we cut off our video. There you go. We almost lost you, Leon.
Leon, we lost you as soon as you started to speak, which is either a coincidence or not a coincidence. So I've cut my video, and I'd like you to go back to immediately after you said good morning, Dr. Rima and Ralph, because we didn't hear anything.
Let's start again. Yeah, good morning, Dr. Reamer and Ralph. Always good to be with you. Very important subject, and as Dr. Reamer mentioned, Australia is always at the cutting edge of a lot of the globalist endeavours, specifically in the department of biomedical and indeed concerning the medical cartel. Our conversation today revolves around an article that has actually been around. I did some research last night, since early 2011. I remember I did cover this on my show last year. Australian government moves to quickly pass laws to sterilise, electroshock and restrain children without parental consent. So this will be the subject of our contemplation during this hour, and there are several different points in this article which we need to go through. But to begin with, I'd just like to qualify my own position in understanding this. I'm by no means a medical professional. I'm just a journalist that basically does research as a common man. I've gone through these documents last night. There's around 400 pages in the actual bill. And the status of the bill at this stage is that this was a draft bill that the article was actually commenting on, which was released in 2011. But the current bill, the Mental Health Bill 2013, is being debated in the Western Australian Parliament. It has passed the Legislative Assembly and now goes to the Legislative Council for review. Now, this bill has been significantly changed from what I can see from the original bill, which was the draft bill, which the article is actually focused on. So we need to make that clear, that the article was really focused on the draft bill, which now doesn't exist. The updated 2013 bill is now what we're talking about. But I would also like to point out this, that Dr. Rima, you would understand that in these bills, specifically concerning medical procedures, there is a lot of double talk and double think. And we need to be fairly careful about the way we look and interpret these these things. And the problem is that the language is coded in such a way that really barristers or medical practitioners are the only ones that understand it. So I'll be coming to this from the angle of, I guess, a common man looking at it and reading it as I see it.
Well, you know, Leon, I've also taken a look at that 400-plus page statute, and I've been reading through it as a lawyer and as a person trained in reading documentation such as that. And while I haven't read it in great detail, it is hundreds of pages, I specifically zeroed in on certain terms that I was looking for and read in more detail Part 17, Division 1, which is about caregivers and parental rights. And I have to tell you that I find it a very disturbing statute. It clearly is an attempt to completely recodify the mental health law of Australia, which, you know, like the mental health law in the United States, is basically a common law. So it changes the law from a common law status in which whatever is not forbidden is permitted, to a code, to an exhaustive mental health code, which is to be enforced by a bureaucracy. This is, of course, very typical. It is the EU model, if you will, as opposed to the common law model. And in reading the language, you learn to read between the lines of the language, because what's not in the language is any significant protection for caregivers and parents. Instead, there is lip service in Part 17, Division 1, where it makes mention of these people. But then when you read the exceptions and the language, you realize that it's just mention. It's not anything significant. They specifically can't go into court to defend the rights of the children or other persons that are being subjected to the bureaucratic control. So in my reading, if the original draft was terrible, that's bad. This version that I've seen is not very good. But tell us more,
Well, maybe we could start off with just doing a bit of an overview in the original fact sheet and the overview. I've just highlight a few points here that we could probably look at, and if you'd allow me, I'll just skip through them quickly, and then maybe Dr. Rima and Ralph, you could come back to comment. But basically, the bill allows for involuntary treatment, and it basically, if the person doesn't have the capacity to consent or is unreasonably refusing treatment, basically it allows what's called the MHT, which is the Medical Health Tribunal, to make the decision, either a psychiatrist or the Medical Health Tribunal. And that is based on the idea that if anyone has significant risk of harm, and that's basically the criteria, if they if a psychiatrist or the Medical Health Tribunal think that anyone has a significant risk of harm either to themselves or to the public, people can be detained up to 21 days, leading into 3 months with an extension. This is a significant point. There seems to be a 21-day period here that's mentioned over and over again. And there is a point here that is a bit of a disturbing one, where it says that children are not specifically mentioned in the current Act. Now, this is a concern because there is some age triggers, 14 and 16, mentioned over and over again, but in the overview it states that children are not specifically mentioned in the Act. It states that the bill obliges proper planning for a child's safety when that happens, with reports going to the child's parent or guardian and the chief psychiatrist. Now, that is, in a way, a little bit of double-think language, I would think, but we can come back to that. It states that there is an exception for emergency treatment. This can be provided to save the person's life or to save endangering others. This is obviously an aspect where if it's an emergency treatment, this triggers another level of ability. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, involuntary patients, whether or not they consent, can have ECT with the approval of the Medical Health Tribunal. So there's Let
me interrupt you for a moment, Leon. For those of you who are not familiar with the term ECT, it's a synonym for what is popularly known as shock therapy. Go ahead, Leon.
And that's it. And involuntary patients, in other words, if a patient is not there of their own will, whether or not they can consent, basically can have this electro ECT. Now, another important point that I'll finish my summary on here and hand it back to both of you. ECT is prohibited on children under 14 years. For children aged 14 to 17, whether the child is voluntary or involuntary, the ECT must be approved by the MHT. No parental consent here. This is the point. The MHT will include a child, an adolescent psychiatrist, and if one is not available, information can be provided by a medical or mental health practitioner with expertise in child or adolescent mental health, who is authorised to do so by the chief psychiatrist. So no mention here of parental consent in regard to ECT with children aged between 14 and 17.
Wait a minute, did I understand you, excuse me, Leon, did I understand you correctly? Because we had a dropout, we lost your sound for a moment. Did I understand you to say that the Mental Health Committee that is making decisions on the child's well-being in terms of involuntary ECT or shock therapy is to include a child? Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct. For a child, a child between the age of 14 and 17, whether the child is voluntary or involuntary, the approval process comes from the MHT.
So I did not hear you say that a child and an adolescent sit on the committee.
No, I think what was actually said was that a child psychologist, but if not available, a child mental health worker, essentially. So that means that a invasive medical technique could be approved without a psychiatrist. Remember the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Of course, Dr. Rima being a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, you have to be a medical doctor before you can become a psychiatrist. And I would think you'd have to have a psychiatrist overseeing any invasive medical technology or technique.
Let me just read this passage again to clarify.
Sure.
ECT is prohibited on children under 14 years. For children aged 14 to 17, which is our focus, whether the child is voluntary or involuntary, ECT must be approved by the Medical Health Tribunal. It will include a child or adolescent psychiatrist, and if one is not available, information can be provided by a medical or mental health practitioner with expertise in child and adolescent mental health, who is authorised to do so by the chief psychiatrist, full stop. My last comment on that point is that the parent or guardian is not included in the consent or the ECT process of a 14 to 17-year-old.
That is horrifying. That is, I'm just so staggered by this, And yet, it is not a surprise because the parent, as we have seen over and over and over again in these internationalized documents, like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child. And of course, that sounds just lovely, but when you actually read it, you discover that the rights of the child mean that the state owns the child. Well, the trend, the tendency is to eliminate the parent as anything but a surrogate actor for the state. And so this is just another step in that process. Tell us more about this bill as it exists now, Leon. And we're so grateful to have Leon Pittard, who is knowledgeable and articulate in these areas and understands the context of globalist control. This is not about mental health, folks. This is about complete control of the population.
Before we go into the rest of the bill, let's take a look, though, at what we just heard, because in addition to the issue of parental consent, we also have a very curious situation where they can dispense with psychiatrists as well. And a person who is not a psychiatrist can authorize the use of an invasive psychiatric treatment, which seems to me to violate medical ethics and to violate the basic provisions of the Helsinki Declaration, which requires physicians to be involved in this sort of activity. Dr. Rima, what is normal in psychiatry? If a decision is made to provide this sort of so-called treatment, isn't a psychiatrist a person who has to be involved in that decision? And if not, isn't this really an interesting way around the health keeper's oath, if you will?
Well, there's a really interesting point here. It is my contention that no physician ethically can participate in electroconvulsive therapy, and anyone who does is in fact violating any oath, any standard of ethical behavior to which they have ever either voluntarily or involuntarily subscribed. And the same is true for a nurse or an anesthesiologist or whomever. I do not believe that electroconvulsive therapy is an activity that can or should be sanctioned by the state or the medical profession under any terms whatsoever. I believe that it is immoral, that it is...
How about torture? How about torture? Is that an appropriate word?
What?
How about torture?
It is absolutely torture. There's no question about that.
So that's why the Natural Solutions Foundation sponsors the Health Keeper's Oath. Because we know from history that the medical profession will be used by the tyrannists to carry out their nefarious activities. We know from the history of the 20th century, from the history of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, how medicine and psychiatry were abused and used to maintain the state and to authorize basically eugenicide, the killing of those that are considered
and
torture.
point out.
Oh, yes, and by the way, there are medical doctors that were involved in torturing people with waterboarding in Guantanamo just recently. So it isn't something from ancient history. Go ahead, Dr. Rima. You were going to point out.
Yes, let me point out that the American Medical Association, not my favorite ethical organization, the American Nurses Association, the American College of Anesthesiologists, and a whole bunch of other mainstream professional organizations prohibit their members from taking part in executions. So it's state executions. But apparently they're allowed to participate in torture, like electroshock and so-called aversive therapy, in which people, children, and others are repeatedly shocked and tortured in order to make them avoid something or other. I'm not quite sure what.
This is the medieval approach to psychiatry, isn't it? So the Health Keeper's Oath was specifically structured to allow health givers, caregivers like Dr. Rima and others, to go on record and to say, no, we're not going to behave like the psychiatrists in the Soviet Union. We're not going to behave like the experimentalist physicians in Nazi Germany. And I'd like to read actually the wording of the oath. I think it's an important thing, and I think that people should go to healthkeepersoath.org and take the oath, because it's not just for health care givers who are physicians. It's also for people who are taking care of relatives who are ill or children who have been injured by vaccines. It's for everyone.
And hospital administrators and clerks and janitors and anybody who's in the healthcare system in any way, because you will be co-opted and you will become a tool of the tyranny if you allow yourself to.
Exactly. And so the wording of the oath: I swear my talents, skills, and knowledge will not be used to perform eugenicide or destroy the rule of legitimate, ethical, and humane law. There's more to it than that, but you'll find it all at healthkeepersoath.org.
That's very, very important. So go ahead, Leon. Let's go forward with this examination of this atrocity.
Okay, well, just before we leave ECT, I'll just envelope this conversation here with ECT. But basically, in summary, if a child is a voluntary patient over 14 years old, they can actually consent to electroconvulsive treatment approved by the MHT. Now, the child bracket in the draft bill, it was 12 years old. They've moved it to 14. Let's move on to psychosurgery, which is another big part of the subject here. Originally, in the draft bill, it was 12-year-olds would be able to consent to psychosurgery. So let's have a look at the current bill. The current bill states...
Again, let me translate the technical term here. Psychosurgery means lobotomy, essentially. Cutting out or ablating or destroying a piece of the brain to change the way people's personalities are structured. Basically, to eliminate their personality, pretty much.
The bill states that psychosurgery is prohibited on children under 16 years. It can only be given with the personal consent of the child, himself or herself, and only with the approval of a specifically constituted MHT, including a neurosurgeon and an additional psychiatrist who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Now, that's the summary. Let me just go into a little detail and I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Rima and Ralph, to comment on this. It must be performed with the informed consent of the child, him or herself. They must have capacity, with the additional requirement of the MHT. It cannot happen to a child under 16 years of age. Psychosurgery is treatment involving, and this is to clarify what Dr. Rima said, the use of surgical techniques into cerebral electrodes to create in a person's brain a lesion intended, one or more other lesions created at the same time to alter permanently the person's thoughts or emotions. The child is recognised to be able to consent to this procedure as long as they have reached 16 years of age, and a neurosurgeon can perform psychosurgery on the patient if the patient gives informed consent to the psychosurgery. Now, there is another clause, another part of the bill, which basically does allow for emergency treatment, which is another sort of issue and subsection. But let me leave my comments on the bill there for you, Dr. Rima and Ralph.
Psychosurgery is electroshock therapy on the biggest dose of political steroids possible. It is an unmitigated evil. There is absolutely no reason ever to ablate the brain for personality change. It's horrifying.
What part of do no harm allows for lesions to be formed in the brain?
Well, do no harm doesn't mean anything because doctors routinely do harm. They use medications for which there are other safer options and so on. Do no harm is a silly folkway in terms of what the medical profession actually does. So I'm not real impressed by the fact that it violates do no harm. You give psychiatric medications, you give most other medications like statins, you're doing big time harm. But the issue here is not whether it harms the child. The issue is whether somebody decides they want to do it. And the parent, who should be the first and foremost primary safeguarding agent of the child, the parent is irrelevant. The parent does not even have to be, if I'm not mistaken, Leon, and correct me if I am, the parent does not even have to be informed.
That's correct. The parent, something, I did a search on this document. There's only one place where parental or guardian term is basically used. Now, you would think that the word parent or parental would be, distributed right throughout this, but basically the MHT and the chief psychiatrist replace and can replace parental consent in this bill. And this is the greatest concern for me, that the state is moving into the family, and that this idea that a child might be classified as involuntary, which automatically gives the MHT and the chief psychiatrist control over that child's treatment and whether or not it's detained for up to 3 months. This is the real worry. This is what it's really about. It's really about consent. This is the issue. And I've got no doubt, as you know, Dr. M, there's people that do have mental problems. There's a lot of issues in our people around the world. But what this is doing, this is giving teeth to the state and to the medical cartel, in my view, in my opinion, to actually cross the line of individual will, of the consent of the individual or the family or the parents in the case of the child as young as 16 years.
In the UK, 70,000 families about 2 years ago, who were considered to be at-risk families, had cameras installed in every room of their flat, their house, their apartment, where they lived. And the watchers observed every aspect of parental behavior. Did they feed the children? Did they feed the children the right food? Did they speak to them nicely? Did they put them to bed at the right times? Did they tell them the right stories? And if not, the parents were at risk of losing control of their children, losing custody of their children. And this was instituted, this was publicly announced as a child welfare forward movement. This was instituted as a pilot program, and the hope was that eventually these cameras would help every parent to parent better.
Doesn't anyone recall, was it in the famous dystopia 1984 that every house had to have a camera so Big Brother might be watching?
Exactly.
So they see no irony, I'm sure.
They do it fondly.
Insane.
Exactly, and that's where we're up to now. Where the Department of Community Services here in Australia, but it's like there's a bit of a war. There's a war happening socially on men too. If I could just quickly make this point, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but that there was a recent report of a father who was playing with his children at a playpen with McDonald's and his children there, and a group of women come up to him and said, "What are you doing in there?" And he said, "Well, I'm supervising my child," and they said, "Can you show us proof?" Now, he looked at them and said, "Well, what do you mean proof?" He said, "Well, we want to know that child is yours." Now, what happened was, subsequently he was reported. Docs actually visited him in his home. Now, he was a stepfather of the children, and they're continuing investigations as to whether there's any abuse. This guy's done nothing at all. But this is a surveillance that's been embedded into the people in society where they think that they've got to look at everyone with suspicion. Now, here's a man just with his own children, but because he's a stepfather, docs intervene and he's on file now as under investigation, and all he's done was played with his child in a playpen. But I mean, this is the mentality of 1984. It's here. This is it. This is a new world order where we have a surveillance society being hypnotised by the state to snitch and snoop on everyone else that's nothing to do with their business, right?
And indeed, it's been going on for a long time. Dr. Rima, you often quote Bertrand Russell on that from, I guess, something he might have written in the 30s or 40s.
1922.
My, that long. Okay.
Bertrand Russell, which is the quite important. Bertrand Russell, who was one of the architects of this situation, said that through injunction and injection and diet, it would become impossible for the ordinary person to have an independent thought.
Now, of course, Sir Lord Russell was not an ordinary person, so he would be allowed to think.
Oh, of course. And he would do it better than most, of course.
One of the interesting subtexts in Brave New World is how the alphas, the people who think they're on top, are actually as conditioned as anybody else in society.
Right. And I keep reminding people, like the NSA watchers and listeners, that historically what happens to the thugs who help to bring in the tyrannical new order is that as soon as the tyrannical new order is well established, the thugs and snitches and new oppressors, the collaborators, are dispensed with because the order knows perfectly well that they are completely unreliable and will switch sides at any time. So they are, in fact, disposed of. This kind of monstrous state has no loyalty, none, and it has no decency, none. It also has no restraints, as we're seeing in this law that our guest Leon Pittard is telling us about. They have no restraints in what they will invade and what they will co-opt in order to achieve what they want. And what they want is total control of every aspect of your life.
That does seem to be.
Now, if I could just refer quickly to another bill that is before the Victorian Parliament, because all of these bills are state bills concerning mental health legislation. There's a point here that I'd just like to make for your comment, and that is the Australian Medical Association in Victoria has made certain changes to this other bill that's in the Victorian Parliament, and it says in a reduction in red tape and administrative requirements contained in the exposure draft and the removal of criminal penalties for doctors who do not complete paperwork, prescriptive professional practice, and restrictions on trainees who will now be able to undertake a range of functions. Now, this caught my eye because what I saw was taking place here is that once upon a time, the bill may have had doctors could be held criminally responsible if they did not complete their paperwork in regard to the patient's treatment. Now, I covered a case here, a significant case, and it was a lady by the name of Eve Hillary, who was a complementary nutritional practitioner who worked with a husband who was a registered GP, and they were basically treating cancer patients who were coming out of mainstream treatment and giving them high nutrition, all these other things. Anyway, the story is Sarah's Last Wish, and a book was written about it, and she's a beautiful lady. And what happened during that case, Sarah basically died because she was experimented on by the doctors in Australia with certain cancer treatments. And the doctors did not fulfill their paperwork obligations. Now, when the parents who were going through this horrendous court battle for years regarding custody, who the state took the child off the parents and then experimented with this new form of treatment, and the child died. Now, in subsequent follow-up investigation, which Sarah's Last Wish, the book, points out, basically the medical practitioners did not fulfill their obligations in paperwork. Now, what this clause does, this allows doctors not to fulfill paperwork, in other words, not to leave a paper trail about the treatments that they have conducted on children and people, and if they die, there is no trace as to what these doctors have done. This clause in this bill basically allows the medical cartel to experiment with humanity, and the results, that there is no responsibility back to them. There is no damage that can come back to the practitioners or the cartel that's enacting either experimental practice or just negligence. It just basically means there's no paper trail. What do you think, Dr. Redmond?
I must say, this is precisely the same thing, although the terms are different, that happens in the United States, because manufacturers and users of vaccines are so totally indemnified against any legal consequences that even if they do leave a paper trail, it doesn't make any difference. They can experiment, they can kill, they can maim, they can alter DNA, leading to cataclysmic consequences, and it doesn't matter because there is no legal consequence. So with a paper trail or without a paper trail, they are totally indemnified.
You know, there might be another way of approaching it. I mean, I understand that the criminal law can sometimes impact public behavior, and a law that said that the intentional destruction of medical records could be criminal. I suppose intentional destruction might be, but if someone makes a mistake and doesn't keep a record or loses a record, the proper remedy is that if they're sued for malpractice, that the lack of the record can be imputed against them. In other words, if the record would have shown certain treatment, then it can be presumed that the treatment was not done right. And so by not having the records, the doctor or the company would basically be putting themselves at great risk of losing in the lawsuit automatically. That would be one way of doing it. That's unfortunately not the law right now. That's not the law that there's a presumption like that. There sometimes is and sometimes isn't. But that would seem to be one way you could do it without trying to involve criminal law in the process.
But here, the situation is that they can do anything they want. And if there's no paper trail, it doesn't matter.
That's because they have no liability. The liability was taken away from them by the courts or by the Congress. In the case of vaccines, by Congress. So, and then of course we have, talking about vaccines and talking about children, as we are doing this hour, 39 minutes into our 55 minutes actually, we can't not discuss shaken babies, so-called. which, as we know, is perhaps one of the largest killers of children. According to the CDC, there will be some 50,000 shaken baby incidents in the United States in 2014, and 25% of them will end in death. That's 12,500 dead babies. I don't hear any politicians talking about it, for one thing. Is that really happening?
To complete that thought, Ralph, what we're talking about is a well-characterized and now scientifically explained vaccine injury that parents are going to jail, sometimes for life, for when there was abuse, but the abuse was at the head of a syringe.
Right, it was vaccine abuse. I know. So that's one of the things. And the other thing that, we'd like to talk to you about, Leon, and make sure that that we are seeing all the connections, is something called the Global Health Security Initiative. Because I think that we can see the ugly hand of Agenda 21 and the GHSI in all of this. But, before we get there, there's one other question I had for you. You said that the two bills you've been talking about are not Australian National Parliament bills, but rather they are bills in Australian states. So mental health issues are dealt with on the state level?
That's correct. And
All
the
right.
article that has been circulating the web doesn't actually state that. Basically what it says is that Australian government. Now, this is a little bit of a fudge here, because it's really the big concerning bill that all these points come out of was the West Australian Mental Health Bill. Now, each state has a different mental health bill, and the one in Western Australia is going through the Parliament, and the one in Victoria. So that's what I've been talking about, the Western Australian one. There's not a national one to my knowledge, although I'm not expertise on this, like I said, but as far as I know, this is what I'm looking at, the Western Australian Mental Health Bill and the Victorian one.
Now,
But,
do you find in Australian politics in general, when several of the states adopt a particular approach to a public matter like mental health, that other states follow along, or is there a liberal conservative spectrum, or is there pretty much an agreement on things like public health and that sort of stuff?
Well, that's a very good question, and it segues into something I've been covering here recently, is that with the push for mandatory vaccines, there's the Australian Medical Association, which is the overarching medical body for doctors, but they also have their own state counterparts. Well, all of the state health ministers just recently were lobbying the federal health minister to basically remove family tax benefit B from parents who do not vaccinate their children. Now, without just simply describing what family tax benefit B is, it's a supplementary payment to parents to help them with their child's schooling. Right? There's a family tax benefit A and B. The B one concerns with the child's schooling. There's I think a $740 payment which helps them with books or whatever it is. And what they're pushing for is that if parents do not vaccinate their children according to the mandatory vaccine schedule, that the federal government would stop these family tax benefit B payments to the parents. Now, this is one tool that the AMA is using to bring about mandatory vaccination, and let's just get it clear here. This is dealing with the children, but what they're after is pregnant women, aged people, adults of all age. I was covering here in my recent documentary regarding the flu pandemic, is that we have private corporations in Australia advertising to come to your workplace and vaccinate all of your workers at a discounted rate. We have pharmaceutical companies advertising the latest flu vaccine for $19.99, cheaper if you get it done at your workplace. So this is a push through by the medical cartel, working through the employer to actually put force or leverage on the employee. So this is some of the aspects of the way the medical cartel is is trying to exercise their might into the general population, starting with children, then to the aged, pregnant women. Basically, their target is all people across the whole sector of the Australian population.
Oh, got a question or two for you about that that particular gambit. How much money will the average family lose if it refuses to vaccinate? Any idea?
I understand there's two payments of $740 through the year, so that would be around about $1,500
All
for
right, and
each child.
it's called Benefit B.
Yeah, family tax benefit B. Yep.
Got it.
Now, does every family get this, or only the families that have demonstrated financial vulnerability?
Yeah, I think it's means tested, and it's basically with children of a certain age I believe in the kindergarten, primary school age group. So in other words,
they're
the target
targeting
is
them
to vaccinate the children in that young age group as much as possible.
Right, that's the target group to reduce.
Israel did this a couple of years ago. We reported on it, and we said that parents did not have to vaccinate their children at that time in Israel, but what they did have to do was decide whether they needed the approximately $2,000 subsidy. And of course, if parents are thinking about it correctly, they'll understand that autism costs a lot more than $2,000 if that's how they want to look at it. But that's generally not how most people look at these things. And so this is a kind of bludgeoning, a kind of blackmail that illustrates that lack of scruples and the willingness to invade any system and use anything to hand to accomplish the means of the state.
And of course, that leads us directly into the Global Health Security Initiative, which is something that we got to talk about because it clearly fits into this entire discussion. GHSI is one of those interesting NGOs, international initiatives. It is a partnership, as they say, and the they includes Benito Mussolini, I'm sure. But it is a partnership between government and business.
It certainly includes the Gates Foundation.
Well, I was about to get to that. It's the United States government, the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, and all sorts of people in the triad, if you will, of international agency, governments, and well-connected crony NGOs. We have real NGOs like Natural Solutions Foundation, and we have crony NGOs. Depends on what you do, I suppose. So, Global Health Security Initiative. They're two darlings of the Secretary General involved in the initiative, and they've published some articles in scholarly journals about public health matters. And Dr. Rima, you went and found and read those articles, didn't you? And
yes.
So the people who are
what they say, and you said the Secretary General, we're talking about Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. These two academics who are his pets say, well, there is a problem, a global problem with the possibility of infectious diseases spreading rapidly. And there are two types of people. There are victims, the people who get the diseases, and there are vectors, the people who spread the diseases. And you can be both a victim and a vector, or you can be one or the other. Well, they realized, and this is a stroke of demented genius, they realized that if you have dead people, you don't have as many, if you have a lot of dead people, you have fewer vectors and fewer victims. And therefore, the answer in their madness is, well, let's kill a lot of people. Let's depopulate the planet, because not only will you have fewer victims and fewer vectors, you will also have people who can't reproduce, because dead people don't tend to reproduce real well absent sperm banks. So what we're talking about is a strategy, I kid you not, to protect you from infectious diseases by making sure you're too dead to get them, and that you can't reproduce, and that your kids are too dead to get them too. And this is in the interest of helping you. Well, how do we implement this if we're Ban Ki-moon and his crazies, the globalists? Well, we implement it in a very simple way. We take over world governance in order to protect you. When there is a threat of any kind of infectious disease, we take over the way your area is governed. We have the right to impose any treatment on you and your family. We have the right to separate your family. We have the right to quarantine and confine you. We have the right to seize all of your property, and you have no rights. None, not one, not a single right of review or refusal. Sorry, you're just out of luck. No refusal, no discussion, just whatever treatment I say. And of course, these are unelected, unaccountable organizations. The Council on Foreign Relations is part of this deal. The Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Department of Health and Human Services of the United States. They love it. They think it's great because this takes the draft bill that we've been talking about in Australia and takes it out of the legislative process and puts it into the because I said so and I've got the guns political process. We, the Natural Solutions Foundation, have an action item against this, but we also have an action item that I urge you to visit, to take. You will be sending an email directly to the Honorable, the Honorable is sort of historical, right? The supposedly Honorable Mr. Tony Abbott. And I think that deluging his email box with hundreds of thousands and then millions of emails saying, we are watching, don't you dare, will not only help the process in Australia, but it will also help the process in your neighborhood, your state, your town, because understand, this is a trial balloon, as we said earlier. This is not an isolated Western Australia nonsense. This is a global push to seize total control of your life and your very existence. Would you agree or disagree with that, Leon?
Absolutely, I would. And if I could just take the liberty, because I know our time's running out, to move into current eugenics debate in Australia. The Sydney Morning Herald, the high cost of living, of holding on. The medical professionals are backing the call for a greater discussion on ending the life of aged care patients within the hospital system. New figures show over 65s are the most expensive age group to treat in intensive care, costing more than complicated neonatal cases. And the point I'd just like to make on this, because I know our time's going, but a closing point on this point of eugenics and ending the aged care life early, the cost, etc. This conversation is always brought into the public regarding economy. Now, I would just like to make the point that those aged people are the ones that have paid for that hospital. They have already expended millions of dollars of their economy and energy into the current medical system that these people are feeding off. So the very people that are suggesting we should withdraw the treatment of aged people over 65 and prefer it, as they've stated, to 20 and 30-year-olds because they live 40 or 50 or 60 years longer for the economy. I mean, this is all about removing compassion from humanity. And I see that in the eugenics push, there is no compassion. It is all about economy. It is all about statistics and the humanity, our innermost, the part that makes us a beautiful part of creation. To be able to care for our elderly is being looked at as though this is a cost we just cannot afford today because of the socialist programs that have been implemented to bankrupt the people. But my last closing point is that our aged people are the ones that have bought and paid for all of this infrastructure. They've banked their money, and now the suggestion is they're not eligible for it anymore.
You know, the mentality involved is very clear. It was expressed, I'm sure, by Dr. Mengele and others of his ilk. And we, once again, want to remind everyone that if you're not being cared for by a healthcare giver who's taken the health keeper's oath, then who are you being cared for by? Thank you very much, Leon, for being with us. Dr. Rima, you want to bring out
Leon,
the show?
please give us your website.
Yes, folks, you can find me at fairincomeradiocom. I have a Vimeo site, the same name, and yeah, all our videos and audios there. Jump in, have a look. Yeah, we do a lot of work, and thank you for having me, Dr. Reem and Ralph. It's been great to be with you again.
All
Excellent.
right.
Thank you so much, Leon. We appreciate your expertise, your passion, and your knowledge. Thank you. FairDincomeradio.com.
Excellent.